Welcome to my humble abode. It's time for a political update of the China virus situation. I did a film a few weeks ago about the effects of lockdown, and I said that we were looking at a very severe economic crisis, worse perhaps than the Great Depression, and that's been confirmed by the Bank of England, which anticipates that the economy will shrink by 14%. That's more than twice the rate in the 2008 crash. So we're going to be looking at the worst economic disaster this country has pretty much ever faced, all caused by this lockdown. When Sweden, for example, has barely had a lockdown and has had a much lower death rate than us, the lockdown has actually had no real proper effect, appreciable effect upon the death rate caused by this virus. Therefore, in my opinion, the lockdown should be scrapped and cancelled straight away, as soon as possible, with the vulnerable, the elderly and people with pre-existing serious medical conditions. All the resources should be put into keeping those people safe. All the resources into keeping those safe. Everyone else back to work. That's what he should have done in the first place. That's what Boris Johnson should have done in the first place. It would have prevented this economic collapse, which is going to cause more deaths than this virus. You'll find, I guarantee, at the end of this year, the death rate for this year will be very little different from a normal year. They're putting down all deaths as due to the China virus. Everything, every heart attack, every stroke is all being put down to the China virus. This is vastly over-exaggerated. This was shown by the case of the so-called expert from Imperial College. Niall Ferguson, Boris Johnson advisor from Imperial College, is the guy who came up with this ridiculous figure of 500,000 deaths from his flawed mapping. He was still one of Boris Johnson's key advisors. Then he was found having an affair, breaking his own rules. Obviously, he didn't regard them as being very serious rules, which shows the invalidity of the whole thing. With his mistress, Antonia Stats, who's a member or works for a hard left worldwide globalist charity called Avaz, that's behind campaigns against Donald Trump, against Marine Le Pen, and that's the sort of people that Boris Johnson's got advising him. It's Reds under the beds, but or Reds in the beds, and they're at the heart of this Tory government. That's what Boris Johnson's government is really all about. Then we've got Tedros Adhanom, the leader of the World Health Organization from Ethiopia, their previous foreign minister, the first black African head of the World Health Organization, the first non-medical doctor to be in charge of the World Health Organization, the first member of a terrorist organization to be in charge of the World Health Organization. He was a member of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, a hard left terrorist group, Maoist, based in the Tigray province of Ethiopia, not to be confused with the Tigrayan Liberation Front, which they were a splinter group from. They're backed by China, surprise, surprise. The World Health Organization, under this joker, gave China a clean bill of health, covered up for China. He also appointed Robert Mugabe as a goodwill ambassador. That's the sort of guy we're dealing with here. We, Britain, are the second biggest contributor, the second biggest country as a contributor to the World Health Organization behind the United States. Donald Trump sensibly has cut that funding off. We should do the same. Of course, Boris Johnson will not do the same. Bill Gates, actually, believe it or not, gives more money than we do. Bill Gates, but there's obviously a reason why Bill Gates does it. He's buying influence and power and wants to get his drugs and pharmaceuticals used by the World Health Organization. We haven't got any reason to do it. We should cut off funding now. Meanwhile, pretty vacant Patel is allowing in tens of thousands of Romanians to pick fruit in this country, while our own people are standing idle. They had a big campaign to get people to back the NHS, no campaign to dig for victory and get our people working in the fields. They didn't want our people to help. At the same time, the useless Priti Patel is standing idle while thousands of people are crossing the channel every week into this country through Dover and the south coast. Our borders are wide open. Incidentally, the talk about the aeroplanes coming in and 15,000 migrants coming in a day through our airports, it isn't really true. They're mostly people coming home from abroad, businessmen. They're still businessmen travelling around, believe it or not. Very, very few of those 15,000 will actually be migrants. But there are these other big issues. Don't forget the other big issues. And Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, again, useless. So should we carry on clapping for the NHS and key workers? No, I think we should not clap. I will not be co-opted to clap for the government, because that's what this is becoming. A clap for the government and a clap for the so-called ethnic minority members of staff of the National Health Service, who are also being specially protected now because allegedly they're supposedly more vulnerable for whatever alleged reason than white British people who work for the National Health Service. So no, I will not be clapping for the National Health Service, because it means you're clapping for the government. You've been co-opted into being a cheerleader for the government. For me, no more. Not that I did it in the first place, I'm not a demonstrative type of person like that, but people, in my opinion, should no longer do this clapping and effectively you're supporting the government every time you do it. This failing, useless government. Now there are three other issues I'll quickly touch upon. These so-called ethno-nats that you get going around come up with some ridiculous view on this whole Chinese virus issue. Firstly, they didn't want to blame China. They wanted to kowtow to China. Perhaps they're pocketing some yen from the Chinese embassy. They didn't want to blame China. They wanted to, because they somehow thought, okay, I'm not Boris Johnson's fan, as you might have gathered, but this virus was going to come here anyway. If it wasn't a Chinese person, it's going to be an Italian or someone else coming here and giving it. Once the virus is in the country, it would have spread. There's no way to keep it out of the country. It's a Chinese virus. We must blame the Chinese and the Chinese state for doing this. But for some reason, the ethno-nats don't want to blame them for doing it, even though they've got the most unhygienic, most disgusting markets in the world. They're threatening animals with extinction. They're polluting the whole world with the byproducts of their industry. But no, the ethno-nats don't want to blame them. Secondly, the GDP. I said the economy is going to shrink by about 14%, more than twice the level it shrunk with the depression, the recession in 2008. Now, that's going to cause untold hardship right across the country. It's going to throw people out of work. It means pensioners are going to get less money because there'll be less government revenue to spend on pensions. It'll have a knock-on effect and cause misery and death in its wake right across the country. That's what happens when the GDP contracts. The GDP isn't some abstract thing. It means the wealth of the country. And if the wealth of the country declines, that is what happens. Again, these ridiculous fools who call themselves ethno-nats think the GDP is some sort of rich man's game. It's not, it's just a measure. It's just a measure. In itself, it is nothing. It's just a measure. But what do you expect from fools? The last factor here is, will this virus affect demographics? Well, not really, actually, because although no one likes anyone dying, their elderly relatives perhaps, or vulnerable people, no one wants them to die, but they're not going to affect the demographics of this country, because in 10-15 years time all those people would have died anyway, and the number of people who die this year will be statistically insignificant number of difference from a normal year. So it's not going to affect the demographics of this country. And actually, if you want to start drilling down into it, it seems to be affecting people from ethnic minority backgrounds disproportionately worse. So, you know, it's not going to affect the demographics of this country. And so abandoning the lockdown is not going to kill our people off. That is not going to happen. So to sum up, we've got to end this ridiculous lockdown. We've got to get Britain back to work. We've got to stop the ritual clapping for the NHS, which just underwrites this Tory government. We've got to get working. We've got to stop putting the blame where it lies on China and get our politics moving and get some change in this country. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe.